We're at the point in the summer where most of the moves that we will see have already happened, and the way that teams will look at the start of the season is pretty much the way that they look now. Of course, there probably will still be a few more trades that happen between now and the start of the season, and there are a small handful of notable free agents left on the market, but they're few and far between. This means that we can take a look at the overall landscape and analyze just how well each team has done to prepare themselves for the next year, and that's exactly what we'll be doing. In this video and in the next video, we'll be going through every single NBA team and we'll be giving them a grade for their overall offseason, taking into account the draft, free agency, and trades made. In this video, we'll be going through the teams in the Eastern Conference, and then in the next video, we'll go through the teams in the Western Conference, so stay tuned for that as well. Before we start though, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as all support is very much appreciated. Now with that being said, let's begin. Going in alphabetical order, we'll be starting with the Atlanta Hawks, and the grade for their offseason is a nice A-. The Hawks made one of the earliest splashes this summer when they traded for DeJounte Murray, and the move showed that they are prioritizing exactly what they needed to. Trae Young's workload in the creation department was way too big, and DeJounte can relieve him of playmaking duties at times alongside him in the backcourt. He's also a massive defensive boost, which is an area that the team desperately needed help in after ranking in the bottom 5 on that end last season. The Hawks then moved on from players like Danilo Gallinari, Kevin Huerter, and Lou Williams, while bringing in 3-and-D guys such as Justin and Aaron Holiday, while also drafting AJ Griffin, who had lottery talent but fell to them at 16th pick. They gave Trae a co-star, they bolstered their defense, and got rid of veterans that were starting to be over the hill, so I was impressed with the moves that they made. Next up is the Boston Celtics, and the grade for their offseason is a strong A. The Celtics didn't need much tweaking with their rotation after making it all the way to the NBA Finals, but they still found a way to improve this summer. They acquired Malcolm Brogdon in a trade with the Pacers where they didn't even have to give up any of their key rotational pieces, and they also brought in Danilo Gallinari as a player that can give them an offensive spark off the bench and space the floor. The Celtics needed to add depth, and they needed a player that could handle playmaking duties this summer, and they got that without losing any of their core pieces, so that's about as good as a team in their position could possibly have done. Up next is the Brooklyn Nets, and the grade for their offseason is a C. The Nets were the weirdest team to grade because I actually do like most of the moves that they made this summer, but we simply cannot ignore the drama and the rumors surrounding Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Durant officially requested a trade this summer, and the feeling is still that Irving's time in Brooklyn is approaching its end too, which would be catastrophic for the organization. However, if those two do buy back in, then the team around them is actually really good. Losing Bruce Brown and Andre Drummond does hurt a little bit, but they re-signed Nicholas Claxton, Patty Mills, and Kessler Edwards, while also acquiring TJ Warren and Royce O'Neal. On paper, the Nets should still be a top team in the conference, but the uncertainty surrounding their two stars hampers their grade. Next up is the Charlotte Hornets, and the grade for their offseason is a D. Not only did the Hornets not really make any significant moves, but they also lost one of their best players in Miles Bridges to some disgusting off-the-court issues. Montrezl Harrell is also no longer with the team, and the only free agency move they made was re-signing Cody Martin. I did like their decision to draft Mark Williams, but ultimately their offseason left a lot to be desired. Up next is the Chicago Bulls, and the grade for their offseason is a B-. The Bulls ended their playoff drought last season, and then after facing the risk of losing Zach LaVine this offseason in free agency, they successfully re-signed him and avoided that disaster. Outside of that, though, the rest of their offseason was decent at best. Bringing in Andre Drummond to be the backup center is a pretty good move, as he excelled in that role in both Philadelphia and Brooklyn last year, and Goran Dragic is still an alright depth piece at his age, but outside of that, they fell into the mediocre tier. Next up is the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the grade for their offseason is a C+. The Cavaliers are a team that you would have thought would have been pretty active this offseason after breaking out as a playoff caliber team last year, but they just haven't been. Re-signing Darius Garland to a max contract extension was a good move, but it was also expected. Drafting Ochai Agbaji at the end of the lottery was a good pick, I have no issues with too, but then after that there isn't much to make anyone blink an eye at. They did add point guard depth by way of Ricky Rubio and Raul Neto, and signing Robin Lopez to be a decent backup center for them is nice, but nothing that deserves a big grade in this sense. We're still waiting to see how the Colin Sexton saga plays out, but they have clearly not made him much of a priority. However, if they do end up re-signing Sexton, then they could get a slight bump from this current grade. Up next is the Detroit Pistons, and the grade for their offseason is a B. The Pistons are in the middle of a rebuild, so the expectations for the moves they make are a bit different compared to other franchises. Landing Jaden Ivey with the 5th pick in the draft was a home run for them. Trading back into the lottery to acquire Jalen Duren with the 13th pick was another strong move to add to their promising core, as he is a nice rim-protecting prospect to develop, and trading away Jeremy Grant is a win for both parties involved, because Grant and his high-usage playstyle will no longer be taking away touches from the team's developing youngsters, while Grant gets to compete for a playoff spot in Portland. I will say, I think they overpaid Marvin Bagley a bit in the market where no one was bidding against them, but besides that, they did well this summer. Next up is the Indiana Pacers, and the grade for their offseason is a C-. The Pacers have found themselves in a weird spot this summer. Last year, they started transitioning towards a rebuild by trading away Domantas Sabonis for Tyrese Halliburton, and then they continued on that trend by moving Malcolm Brogdon for some younger pieces and draft capital. But both Miles Turner and Buddy Hield are still on the roster after many thought that they would have been traded to move even more forward with the rebuild. I would have loved their offseason if they successfully signed DeAndre Ayton like they wanted to, but because the Suns matched their offer, their offseason becomes much more underwhelming. Benedict Mathurin, who they took with the 6th pick in the draft, looked very good in Summer League, but they didn't really make any other notable moves outside of what I mentioned. Up next is the Miami Heat, and the grade for their offseason is a D. The Heat were mentioned in every rumor surrounding an available big name on the market, but they didn't land a single one of them. Instead, after falling short in the conference finals, they decided to basically stand pat with the group that they have, watching other contenders around them bolster their squads. The only notable moves they made were re-signing Victor Oladipo, Dwayne Dedmon, and Caleb Martin, but they lost PJ Tucker and they didn't sign or trade for anyone else. They're still a very good team in a conference where there's a lot of competition, but they made no significant changes, so you can't really give them a good grade for it. Next up is the Milwaukee Bucks, and the grade for their offseason is a C. Similar to the Miami Heat, but not quite to the same degree, the Bucks spent their summer mostly just re-signing players from last year's team, such as Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, Wesley Matthews, and Serge Ibaka, but they also didn't lose any of their main contributors from a season ago. Their only real outside signing was Joe Ingles, who was already starting to slow down with his production before he suffered a torn ACL, so at this point, he barely even counts as an impact signing. Up next is the New York Knicks, and their offseason grade is a C+. The Knicks added a few future first-round picks on draft night, they signed Jalen Brunson, and they extended Mitchell Robinson, but after all of it, these are all a bunch of decent moves at best. Brunson is a clear upgrade over Kemba Walker, and with Nerlens Noel gone, Robinson will be more heavily featured, but still there seems to be an uphill climb for them to achieve their goal, which is making the playoffs. They do have the assets to make a big trade in the future, so we'll have to wait and see if they can get that done. Next up is the Orlando Magic, and the grade for their offseason is a B. The Magic are another team in the rebuilding stage, so when they drafted Paolo Banchero #1 overall in the draft, it was a pleasant surprise to many. Banchero is expected to be the best scoring talent in the draft and should fit in very well alongside the other young players coming up in their system, especially because the power forward spot was their biggest position of need. They re-signed Bol Bol, Mo Bamba, and Gary Harris as well, so all in all, they had a pretty solid summer. Up next is the Philadelphia 76ers, and the grade for their offseason is a nice A-. This was a very important summer for the Sixers, as they came out as well as they possibly could have given the circumstances. James Harden taking a pay cut was massive because it gives them money to be able to afford signing impactful role players such as PJ Tucker and Daniel House, and then they also traded for DeAnthony Melton, who is one of the best 3-and-D role players in the league at the moment. The Sixers needed to add depth that can contribute on both ends of the floor, and that is exactly what they did. Up next is the Toronto Raptors, and the grade for their offseason is a B. Again, the Raptors are a playoff team that didn't necessarily make many moves in the offseason, but the ones that they did make were positive. They re-signed Thaddeus Young and Chris Boucher, while bringing in Otto Porter and Juancho Hernan-Gomez in free agency, so they didn't lose anything of significance, while giving themselves more solid wing depth. And finally, the last team in the East is the Washington Wizards, and the grade for their offseason is a C. The Wizards came away very well in the trade where they shipped out Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in exchange for Monte Morris and Will Barton, and drafting Johnny Davis was another solid selection that they made in the lottery of this year's draft. But the reason that their grade took a hit is because of how disastrous the contract extension that they gave Bradley Beal could become. Not only did they give him the full Supermax, but they also included a no-trade clause, making him one of just a handful of players ever to receive one in their contracts. He holds way too much power over the franchise now, and the direction of the team isn't necessarily headed in the right direction in the near future. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below how you would grade the off seasons of these teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.